Hello, and welcome to the Farmhouse. I'm Candace Wierzbowski.
And I'm Stephanie Spiker.
Recently, I talked with Andrea Davis-Cetina, who owns Quarter Acre Farm, a certified organic produce farm on Maryland's Eastern Shore. Although interestingly, Quarter Acre Farm has not always been in Maryland. Andrea actually got started farming in California before she decided to move, farm and all, to the East Coast, which is an interesting story that I will let her tell. Now that she has her Maryland operation set and running, Andrea is cultivating a variety of vegetables, fruits, and herbs, which she sells at the Easton Farmers Market. But that's not all you'll find if you go to her stand. Her husband is a chef, and honestly, I think a farmer and a chef make a great pair. And so they also sell prepared foods like tacos, pico de gallo, and guacamole. So, Steph, I know we've talked before about what we like to buy at farmers markets, what gets us excited, but I don't think we've ever talked about the snacks or treats that you can also find at farmers markets. Do you have any go-to favorites?
I love a good, a jam. I have started buying my strawberry jams from a farm stand because they're just so good.
Oh, yeah.
Also, I am a sucker for local honey.
Same.
Oh my gosh.
It's healing,
Yes, it is. I used to honestly not be a huge honey person until I started at the same farm where I buy my milk and eggs and stuff. They don't make the honey themselves, but they also sell some other local farmers products, and they have this wildflower honey that is just my favorite thing in the world. So yeah, I would say jams and honeys are my top two packaged farmers market products.
Yeah, I love a good honey. I will eat honey by the spoonful. I don't know if it's become apparent on this podcast or not, but I have quite a sweet tooth. Also, though, as far as just walking around with snacks, if I see elote anywhere at that farmer's market, I am buying elote at that farmer's market. All right, well, we can hear some more from Andrea about what they're selling at their farmer's market stand and about what she's doing at Quarter Acre Farms. Andrea, welcome to the Farmhouse.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So you're currently located on Maryland's Eastern Shore, but I read that Quarter Acre Farms, it actually started in California. So could you share how the farm got started and why you decided to move to Maryland?
Yeah, so I'm even going to pedal back a little bit more. So I grew up in Maryland. I grew up outside of Havre de Grace in Aberdeen, in a really rural part of Maryland, but my family did not farm. I didn't grow up on a farm, but I was surrounded by farms. Then when I went away to college, I went to Hampshire College up in Massachusetts, and with the plan to study art, but they have a large working farm. So I got a work study job on the farm because I, thought it would be fun, get to be outside. And within that first semester, I immediately fell in love with agriculture. And so I switched my area of focus to sustainable agriculture, which is what I graduated with a bachelor's in. And so after I graduated, I moved to California because, why not? You're, out of college. I could fit everything I owned in my car. So I moved to California with the idea that I would get a job at a nonprofit that dealt with agriculture or sustainability, or that, I would have office job or something like that. But that was the beginning of the recession, and I could not get any of those entry-level positions. And so I started doing edible landscaping and gardening for private clients and restaurants. And so I got involved with the local agriculture in Northern California. I was living in Sonoma. And so then I had the opportunity in the spring of 2008 to lease a quarter acre of land from another farmer. And so that is what spurred me to just jump in and be like, no one wants to hire me. I'll create my own job. And that is how I started Quarter Acre Farm in March of 2008. While I was in California, I expanded the farm, leased various different pieces of land. So it kind of ebbed and flowed in size at the most, I was farming an acre and a half by myself. And I sold directly to consumers there, farmers markets, a little bit of restaurant and wholesale. And so I had the farm there for 10 years. And while I was there, I was always looking for how was I going to have long-term land access, buying land, long-term leases, like something like that. Like anybody that is in agriculture knows that it's really hard to make, any type of plan if you're not sure that you're going to have land access in the next year.
Right.
Anyway, there was throughout the 10 years, I tried a lot of different possibilities, got really creative, but really could never get any type of long-term land access out there. And so I also while in California, met my husband and got married. And so we started thinking about like, okay, we're gonna need to look outside of California to have that security of long-term land access. And being from Maryland and my parents still living out in Maryland, though they had moved away from where I grew up and moved to the Eastern Shore of Maryland, I was like, well, let's look at Maryland to move to farm so we can tell my parents why we are not going to move back to Maryland. So we start looking at it, and actually if you look on a map, Sonoma, California, it's a straight line to the Eastern Shore of Maryland. The climate is different. Yeah, the climate is different, but it's not that different as far as like the length of the growing season, the amount of sunlight, those types of things. And then also the clientele that I had grown accustomed to working with out in Sonoma was very similar to the clientele on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. You have locals, you have tourists, you have weekenders, you have retirees. It was a
Hmm.
very similar makeup. So it just felt like, we could take, the model that I had, found success with over the development of 10 years of making the farm and transport it to the Eastern Shore of Maryland with, an idea that it might be successful. In so we
Okay.
started planning the move, and it took us about a year before we actually moved, which we moved in 2018. So that was a year I did not farm because there was not a way that we could figure out how to actually farm when you're moving cross country. And then in
Yeah.
2019, I restarted Quarter Acre Farm in Maryland on leased land. So that is just give you a little whirlwind of the story from growing up to getting back to Maryland.
Wow. I can't imagine moving, I mean, basically moving your farm across the country. I mean, I think moving just a household across the country, stressful enough. So, I mean, what did you guys have to take into account? Because I would assume you guys probably had, tools, equipment, if there were, starters or seeds that you wanted to bring with you.
hmm Yeah, so that was one reason why, it was when we were figuring out, we made the decision, okay, we want to move, like what time of year should we move? When should we do it? And there really was no way that, particularly as a vegetable farmer, that you could kind of either start and finish a farming season from where you were leaving or start and finish a farming season from where you were going. So, um,
Hmm.
I decided that, you know, at the end of 2017, that was going to be the end of the farming in California. So that meant that I didn't have to deal with like plants and seeds and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And so when I, stopped farming for the seed, I never have really farmed through the winter. So my crops, end in the, holiday season. And so it was just like, okay, like closing up shop. And then, you know, as someone who has leased land for so long, we were a pretty lean and continue to be a pretty lean operation. So, like, I did not have a lot of equipment. I've never owned a full-size tractor. I still don't. And so there was a lot of things like I had a small-ish hoop house that I used as a greenhouse. Like I took that down and like sold it because it was like I looked at it, I was like, I don't want to put this thing back up. Like maybe I lost a piece or something. And so I think and this similar way with our personal belongings, where we were going to have to pay to move this. So if it was something that needed to be replaced, it might just be cheaper to like buy it in, where we're going in Maryland. And so basically we got rid of everything that did not have sentimental value or we thought would be really hard to replace. So like I said, both personal and business. So it was, like we got rid of most of our furniture with the farm stuff. It was like I got rid of all my
Mhm.
greenhouse tables. I got, rid of all of my, seedling trays and stuff like that. Because also, some of the stuff I had been using for 10 years and kind of needed to be replaced anyway. We used a container to move our stuff. So it was like we had a limited amount of space and I didn't want to, pay for stuff. So yeah, it was like we pretty much got rid of everything from the farm, except I have
Mhm.
a Italian walking tractor. I took that and the implements. Um, I use a particular way I trellis my tomatoes. So I did take those poles. And yeah, I took like hand tools and stuff like that, but I got rid of, like I sold, like I wasn't T-post, they're easy to replace, right? So I was like selling, everything, which also gave, this little bit of cash flow that I could put aside so to restart the farm.
So tell us about your growing operation at Quarter Acre Farm now that you're here.
Like I said, the purpose of us moving to Maryland was for long-term land access because we believe that we would be able to afford to buy property here. But to just get going, I leased a half an acre of land from uh, my parents' neighbor's son. So it was just a uh, fallow piece of land that had never been grown on. It was just mowed every year. It had no water source, but
Hmm.
it was close enough to my parents' house that I could run a hose to get water out to it. Because that was actually what I found was the hardest thing when looking for land to lease. So much land that I looked at in Maryland had no water access. And for doing mixed vegetable and greenhouse production, like I need to irrigate. Like there's no way around that. So I secured that lease, and because it also had been fallow, I was able to have it certified organic in the first year. I had been certified organic in California, and I really believe in that certification. I certified that land that first year in 2019 and we grew on that. And I basically started doing the same kind of crop mix that I had found success in California, which is basically my spring crop is seedlings to the home gardener. So I grow a ton of different vegetable seedlings, herbs, some flowers, just a really big mix and I sell those at the farmers market from April through September-ish. And then the first field crop that we do is tomatoes. So we're not planting anything in the field until it's time to do tomatoes. And we do a large mix of cherry and heirloom tomatoes. And that's really like 70-80% of the field is tomatoes. And then also in the field, we'll do a decent amount of sweet potatoes, um, a little bit of tomatillos, a little bit of peppers, a little bit of like winter squash, and then garlic is like the kind of the winter crop that I do. Um, and so yeah, so that was, kind of like the mix and that was successful. And of course, like I really had to fine tune the way that I was growing in Maryland because I had actually never farmed in Maryland, even though I grew up here. I had uh farmed in college in Massachusetts and I spent my summers at different farms across the country, but it never had to be in Maryland. So there was some learning curve to just like this the way the seasons were, the type of weeds that are here, and just having to like refine like the methods that I use, because I had been growing for 10 years in an arid climate that has like a wet and a dry season, has very different predominant weeds, just kind of a different way to handle it. Yeah, so we started selling at the farmers market. Also, I have to point out that in uh the farm had always been just me doing the work. My husband loves that I farm, but he has no interest in farming. But he is a chef. And so that first season that we were going to sell at the farmer's market, before it started, I had already applied. I'd gotten in to sell my like seedlings and produce. They put out a call to all of the accepted vendors. Do you know any like prepared food vendor? We really want to have like a breakfast vendor at the market and stuff. And so I was basically just like, what do you need to sell prepared food here? I was very familiar with what it required in California, having looked into it, but never having done that. And so, they explained to us the health permit that we needed and stuff like that. And so, it my husband was like, yeah, we could do like breakfast tacos and quesadillas. And so that's what we did that first season. It was a huge success. So we had a double booth, like me with my produce and seedlings, and then him selling tacos and quesadillas. And it worked out really well. Then the next year was 2020. So luckily our market had not started before the pandemic lockdown happened, but we, of like everybody, had to really change what we were doing. And so, in regards to the prepared food, we did not feel comfortable cooking in front of people, which is what we had been doing. And so, we changed to only selling containers of our pico de gallo, which is made with our tomatoes when they're in season, and then also offering guacamole, which is not something we had offered before because we don't grow avocados. But we were trying to have another product, and something customers had requested of us. So for 2020 and 2021, for the prepared food, that's all that we were doing, was selling these like containers that we did in a commercial kitchen the night before, and then like had
Mm-hmm.
limited interaction. But we would still have people come up to us that said, when are you going to cook tacos again? Like when is that going to happen? So we thought that was pretty cool, considering we had only done it 1 year and it had been almost 2 years and people were still looking for it. And so in 2022, we decided that we would get back into that. Now, that winter in December of 21, we purchased a farm property, and now we actually had, uh, 4 cleared acres, an old farmhouse, and this asset. And so this asset that we have never had any type of large asset before. So when I started the farm in '08, I just started as a sole proprietorship. It was just me. I was, had tools
Mm-hmm.
and leased land. And I had, from advice from like CPAs and different people, when I would ask about the business structure, they would always say, like, you can just stay a sole proprietor. You don't really have anything to, protect, right? But now that we had this asset, we created an LLC. Also, as we were deciding to start doing food again, it was so successful that first year that we did it, that it was a lot of work for us to do, like my husband's cooking, someone's got to take the orders and do the money. And I'm trying to tell people about the different varieties of tomato seedlings that I have. Like we need it to have, staff at the farmers market booth.
Sure, yeah.
And so then that year too, we hired our very first staff, which we hired 2 people to work in the market booth with us. And so then we were also able to like expand the prepared food, because we were cooking tacos and quesadillas again. And then our containers of pico de gallo and guacamole had been so successful that we started, incorporating that. So it really, kind of became much more of a a larger business and, uh, much more of a demand to like keep up with all of the customers.
Well, it sounds like you found your fan base over there. So that's great. I wanted to ask you, you kind of mentioned about, organic farming. You guys are certified organic. Obviously it's a big part of your farm's business. I also noticed on your website when I was looking it up in the About You section, the header says, Andrea, organic farmer. So it seems like it's kind of almost a part of your identity. So why is growing organic so important to you?
It's really important to me because from there's a couple different levels to it. Like one, just on the ethos of how I grow and how I affect the world, right? Like, I want to leave a piece of land better than I found it. So the way that I'm going to interact with that piece of land is I'm going to, not be trying to poison it. I'm going to be adding, amendments to it to like, not just sustain the health that it was at when I came in, but to, increase that and make it more healthy, more resilient. Years ago, when I was farming in California, I started, that started the farm in '08 and I, went to a farmer's market and I would have customers that would walk by and they would ask if I was certified organic and I would say, "No, I'm not, but this is how I grow." And I'd have a whole conversation with them about my growing methods and everything like that. I had like little signage
Hmm.
explaining it and stuff. And then they would like typically like buy something from me. But, I got to thinking that, during that first experience of selling at the farmer's market, that like one, it took me a long time to have that one interaction and sell maybe like a bunch of carrots, and then yeah, the customer would come back and theoretically I
Right,
don't have
right.
to tell them again, but that was a lot for like, $2, $4 transaction. And then the other thing that I thought of is how many people didn't ask me? Not everybody wants to have a conversation with who they're shopping
Mm.
from, right? And I know myself as a shopper, like I'm looking for
Hmm.
particular things. I'm not necessarily going to ask if I don't see it. So then I was like, oh my gosh, like I could be losing a lot of shoppers because they're looking for organic label and they're not going to, ask me or, whatever. And I also felt that, I had the misconception that I was such a small operation that I couldn't be certified organic or like I couldn't be part of the cool kids group, right? And luckily, during that time, I had a lot of fellow farmer friends that, might have been bigger than me in size, but not that much bigger, and they were getting certified organic. And so it was like, oh, well,
Hmm.
like, if you can do it, like I could do it. And they would also, I had questions for them because it seemed like a really like big, complicated, scary thing. And once I would talk to them, I'm like, oh no, this is like totally doable. So in 2010, I became certified organic with CCOF. It was a really great experience going through the certification process because a lot of it was already stuff that I was doing, not using synthetic amendments, not using synthetic herbicides, pesticides, any of those types of things, right? But it also encouraged me to do some things that just I should have been doing because it was good for business, like keeping track of when I apply my inputs, at what quantity am I applying those, like particularly being a small operation where I'm the owner and I'm also doing most of the work. Like I wouldn't write down that on, April 10th, I, got in a load of compost and applied to the field,
Right.
and so it,
It's all in your head because,
right, it's all in my head. I'm like, well, what's it matter? And so, some of the requirements for being certified organic that I wasn't doing, it was just, uh, really good business things that you should be doing to keep track of, you know, what you're putting in your operation and what's going out of your operation. And then once and then I had that organic label at the farmer's market, it totally increased my sales. It made for a lot quicker transactions. I had business cards, and so like I had it on my business card. And what was so interesting to me was, I mean, one, the name of my farm is Quarter Acre Farm, right? It's like small. That's like a little,
Mm-hmm.
thing, right? And I would, whatever, wherever I'd be having some conversation. Maybe it would be at a farming conference, or maybe it would be at like my doctor's office, what do you do for work, right? And I would tell them, what I do. And it was funny because it would a lot of times be, and there still is today. Like I just had a conversation yesterday where it was like, oh, it's so quaint what you do. And like I don't use the word garden when I talk about what I do, but typically the
Right.
other person will start saying like, what do you grow in your garden? And I'm like 2,000 tomato
Oh, no.
plants, but which is about how many I grow. But then I would, hand them a business, as you kind of go like, oh yeah, keep in touch, or this is how to contact me. And they look at my business card, they'd see the certified organic logo, and then they'd be like, oh, you know what you're doing. And oh yeah, like
Mm,
now as a restaurant, I want to buy from you. Like it also added this level of
gotcha.
legitimacy, which is truly there. Like I know what I'm doing. But sometimes having, this label that is highly regulated, it adds that level of trust that people who don't know you or aren't really familiar with your operation then go like, well, you must know what you're doing.
Right. It's a
It
shorthand.
is. It is. And the thing is, like like I said, the amount of work involved to be certified organic is not difficult. It's, so if there's systems, if they aren't systems in place that you already are doing, they're good ones for you to do anyway to have a successful, profitable business. So to me, it's like a no-brainer. And that's why I continued to be certified organic ever since.
Great. Well, speaking of sustainable agriculture, so earlier this year, you were awarded a scholarship from the historic Lewes Farmers Market to go and attend the PASA Sustainable Agriculture Conference. So, how did that go? Have you ever been there before? What was the experience like?
Yeah, so I have been to the PASA conference before. I think this was my fourth time going. It is a wonderful conference. It's one of the best ag conferences that I've, been to. And I'm a little bit of a conference nerd. Like I really enjoy going to a conference. What interests me this year, and pretty much every year with PASA, is that they have such a large selection of sessions and workshops to go to during the 3-day period that it is like there's something for everyone. And typically every session period of time, there's two or three that you really want to go to. Because I'm a bit of a conference nerd, each year where I want to go, I kind of think about like, why am I going? And this is like one of those kind of like boring business owner hats that you sometimes have to put on, where it's like, what would be good for me to learn for my business? Like, because there's always some really like fun, like, or just like intellectually interesting sessions that get put on, but like is that going to help me, grow or sustain my business? And so last year I went to PASA as well, and last year my focus was really on like people management, because in addition to our two market
Okay.
employees, in 23 we hired our first farm employees. So right now we have they're seasonal, they're very part-time, but we typically employ about 5 individuals during our growing season. So last year I was really focused on like kind of people management and like things around employees. And I had some really great takeaways and resources that I gained there. But this year, I really wanted to look at perennial crops and agroforestry. So our property is actually like 12.6 acres, and 8 acres is woodland. So we have a good chunk that is wooded in the trees. And in addition to that, over the last few years, we've been establishing a pawpaw patch. I'm a little obsessed with pawpaws. And so they had a really great session that was just on pawpaws, and they had 3 different growers talking about their methods for planting the trees, harvesting the trees, and going to market. And then I also took some sessions that were just looking at different perennial crops like sunchokes, also known as Jerusalem artichokes, as well as like some lesser known like berries and then things that could be kind of utilized either on the woodland edge or within the woodland, because it's something that like we have I'd like to manage better, but we really have, it's just kind of like a lot of people, we have like a woods that's around our house and it just kind of like there. So there was some really great sessions on that. And then I also did some kind of more, like a um vegetable crop planning, some a little bit just vegetable based growing things.
Gotcha. Okay. I think you might have been at one of the same sessions as one of our reporters who was covering chestnut trees, because I know that the person who was talking about chestnut trees was also talking about pawpaws.
Yeah, well, because pawpaws are really cool. No, I did not. Yes, there was a one on chestnuts and hazel, and I did not go to that. That was one of those sessions where there was like two ones that I really wanted to go to, and it's kind of like at the last minute, it's like, do I go in this door? Do I go in that door? And so I
Uh,
missed the chestnut one. But there's the last few years there's in the trade show, which another reason I like PASA is because it has such a nice size trade show. But the last few years there's been a booth there with I'm not sure what the organization is called, but they got everything chestnut. They have like all the stuff on how to grow chestnuts, the history of the American chestnut and everything. And so I have spent some time at their booth.
Very cool. All right. So, what does it mean to you to be a woman in ag?
I don't know. It's a tricky question because I feel like this might not actually answer your question, but what like my experience as a woman in ag is that there's a lot that women in ag have to overcome as far as perception goes. So when I was learning how to farm, I was like, studying it in the classroom, apprenticing on farms. Um, I, I always was fortunate to be in a very welcoming, encouraging environment. Nobody questioned that me as a woman, first generation farmer, there was no question about why I should be there. It was like, you love farming, you want to do it, great. And but when I started selling to the public and interacting with the public directly, I always ran into issues of people not believing me when I said I was the farmer. I mean, to this day, it still happens where, you know, uh, eh, you go to a farmer's market, customers and farmers know this, like the person at the booth isn't necessarily the producer of the product, right? Like they might be an employee, they might be like the kid, they might, be your, uncle or something like that, right? Time and time again have these conversations where people either assume that my husband is the farmer or that my parents are the farm or I'm just an employee. And and I think some of it just comes down to this perception of like when you hear the word farmer, what do you picture, right? Like it's McDonald. And even so, I live down the street from an elementary school. And this past spring, I get an email from the second grade teacher inviting me to career day to, talk about being a farmer and stuff. And so I'm like, yeah, sure, like I'll do that, So I like make up this like little PowerPoint for some like second graders and like my first, slide is a picture of me in the field and it says I am a farmer, and it has like my name and stuff. And still, like so many of the kids were like, I think there was even one kid that said, well, farmers are boys, like and so it's
Interesting.
I think um as a woman farmer, it's really easy to feel a little like invisible or like that, you're the farmer's wife or you're the support staff. When someone asks me like what I do, like I'm always like, I'm a farmer. And I think that that type of thing is like really important because, you know, just like they say, like if you can't see it, it's really hard to, identify that that's what something is. And so, like I think as a woman in ag, you know, you need to know that you're in the right place. Women have always been involved in ag and they've always been leaders, and that there's no reason that you can't stand at the front and be like, I'm the one in charge.
Hear, hear. All right. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time to talk to us about Quarter Acre Farm and your journey.
Oh, thanks. I really appreciate you inviting me. It's been great to chat.
I really enjoyed listening to Andrea's story. First of all, moving a farm across the country, more power to her.
Moving is stressful enough.
Yeah.
I can't imagine having to do it with a farm.
But also, I love the fact that she is still, sticks with her kind of roots of being Quarter Acre Farm, even though now her farm is much larger than that. That just makes me smile.
Yeah.
But I guess that kind of leads into what I wanted to talk about, is how much we've heard, especially new and beginning farmers on this podcast, talk about the issue of land access and how hard it is to find land. There are people out there who would love to farm that just don't have the ability to find the land they need. Because even after moving to Maryland, it sounded like she still struggled a little bit with trying to find the right land to lease, and it took her and her husband a little bit of time until they actually bought property. So I'm really glad that it's worked out for her, but it's, it's a long time in the making, a lot of years of kind of struggling to figure out what's going to work. So
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because, we hear all the time, why aren't there more young farmers coming out? But it's because, there's a few reasons, but land access is a major one.
Yeah. At the end of the day, agriculture is a bit of a tough industry to break into sometimes. And so, yeah, her story is very, very exciting. And I will completely agree with what you said at the beginning of the episode, that I feel like a farmer and a chef getting married is a perfect match.
Yeah. The food's going to be good.
Yeah. And they've really just found their perfect little niche. To be able to go to a farmer's market and you are buying your produce and then basically at the same stand buying food that is made with that produce from a professional chef.
Yeah, and I loved hearing that people missed them.
Yeah.
When they stopped doing the breakfast tacos and whatnot, that people were like, when are those coming back? And it had only been a year, I guess, that they had done that before the pandemic started. So it must be good stuff.
I know. I'm like, should we take a road trip to Maryland for a taco? Maybe. We'll take our producer Eric with us. He's a taco fan. But I think now that we've been doing this show for over a year at this point, it's interesting. There are always a few recurring kind of themes that come up. And, Andrea definitely brought one up about the whole, people assume she's not the actual farmer, which in her case is almost insane to me because she, for so many of the years she's been farming, has been the only farmer.
Right.
A
one-woman operation.
Yeah. And even now, while her husband is the chef, he still isn't farming with her. And, so it's just she has more patience than I do, I think, because she also told the story of basically someone being oh, so you're gardening? No, this is a real farm.
Well, And it's something that starts early, apparently, because she told that story about how, she went to career day and all those second graders said, oh, farmers are boys.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've got to start teaching these kids a little bit younger that, farmers could be anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, well, we've been doing this show for a year and we've never gotten close to running out of women in agriculture to talk to. So,
That's true.
They are out there for sure. And yeah, I found her story very inspiring. I love that she is completely new into agriculture and she kind of just was like, you know what? This is how I'm going to make money. We're just going to go for it. And she's overcome a lot, moving and land access and all these things to have such a thriving farm right now. I just think that's very cool.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I think that wraps things up for us. Thank you all for listening. If you liked this episode, please consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. And if you really like this episode, please consider leaving us a review.
If you have any questions or thoughts about this episode or the podcast, you can email us at farmhouse@lancasterfarming.com.
You can also find us on social media at Lancaster Farming on most platforms.
Thank you again for visiting us at the farmhouse. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Candace.
We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
This episode of The Farmhouse is copyright 2025 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family.
It was written by Stephanie Spiker and Candace Worzbowski. It was produced by Eric Herlock and Sophia Kurzius. The music is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.